Hey guys, so there were only 2 more days left in the week, and because of Chuseok, we need to get through Unit 3. So we just did 3.9 last class. We talked about the Bill of Rights. Now we're going to be talking about 3.10, 3.11, and 3.12. I made this video so we can get through this really quick. All right, let's go. So 3.10 talks about shaping the new republic, and it's basically talks about the new government and what it's going to do. If you look at all the objectives that are highlighted or underlined, please just pause this video, take a moment to read them. It basically talks about George Washington, his presidency, both foreign and domestic issues, and then it goes on to John Adams. So all of the key concepts that you saw on the last slide, I'm going to break them down into little bits and pieces, just like this one. So this one basically says key concept. We're going to be talking about the presidential administrations of George Washington and John Adams, just like we said before. George Washington is going to be elected our nation's first president. He's going to be the head of the executive branch. So what I need you to do is play the video. He is going to swear an oath to the Constitution, and this is the same oath that all other presidents take when they become president. So now what does George Washington do? He's the first president. What does he do in his job? So he knows that whatever he does, all other presidents are probably going to follow his lead. So the first thing that he does is he establishes a cabinet. And in his cabinet, which is a group of advisors, they are going to specialize in certain departments. So if you look at this picture right here, Henry Knox is the Secretary of War, Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of Treasury, Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, and Edmund Randolph is the Attorney General. These four people are going to advise him. Now, the two people that you need to know that are most important are Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of Treasury, because they are not going to get along. Because Jefferson and Hamilton can't get along, they are going to be responsible for creating the first party system. And I need you to pause this, read the entire thing, and then we'll continue. This is a picture of George Washington and his cabinet, his four advisors. Over to his left is John Adams. He is the vice president. But again, the two main people, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson. If you look at this chart, say like the president dies, and then the vice president dies, and then the leader of the House of Representatives and the leader of the Senate, they both die. The next people to become president are the secretaries. And if you notice the first four, those are the first four, like those jobs from Washington's cabinet. You guys know when you make an agreement with someone and the person that you make an agreement with, they stretch the requirements of what you're supposed to do. So, for example, when I wanted to play baseball, I thought that all I was going to do was play baseball. But my coach said, you need to go to the weight room every day. You need a lift so you can become a stronger hitter. And I was thinking to myself, all I want to do is play baseball because that's what was in my agreement with him. So under this thing called the elastic clause, and elastic stretches the truth, it says in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, Congress has the power to make all laws which are necessary and proper for carrying out the powers of the U.S. Constitution. So Alexander Hamilton, he said, well, in the Constitution it said that the government has the power to regulate interstate commerce. And he took that to mean, well, if we're in charge of commerce and trade, that means that we should also have the power to create a national bank. You know who was against that? Thomas Jefferson. He was like, nowhere in the Constitution does it talk about a national bank. So that's also why the two of them cannot agree. So Hamilton brings this idea of a national bank to George Washington, and Washington agrees to it. And Jefferson is angry. Okay, first things first, how does a bank work? Here's how a bank works. Say I want to buy a car. The car costs $50,000. I can't afford it, so I'm going to use my credit card. When I use my credit card, the bank is going to pay off the entire car, which is $50,000. I get my car, but now I have to pay $350 every month for the next 6 years to the bank. What does that mean? It means that the bank has someone, me, who is in debt to it. I owe that bank money. So this new national bank, Hamilton's Bank, needs places to be in debt to it. So Hamilton's like, well, how do I get people to be in debt to my bank? Well, all 13 colonies, or now states, they owe money to who? They owe money to France, because remember, France helped America in the Revolutionary War. So those 13 governments owe France money, and Hamilton has a very, very good idea. Watch this video on the next slide, and I'll explain it to you after. I know that video probably seemed a little bit confusing to you guys, but here's essentially what it meant. The 13 state governments, remember they owed France money after the Revolutionary War, but the National Bank under Alexander Hamilton is going to pay back all that debt, pay off all the debt. So now these 13 state governments are going to pay back in monthly installments to Hamilton's National Bank um, their money, just like I paid off my car in the previous example. Why does Hamilton do that? Think about it this way. If I'm a European country and I'm looking at the American government and I'm thinking to myself, wow, these 13 states are paying the national government some money. If it has money, that means it has good credit. If it has good credit, I might, trade with them in the future. And that's what Hamilton wanted to do. That was his goal. Speaking of Europe, while all of this was going on, there was this huge revolution started by Napoleon. France and Britain are going to go to war, and this is going to affect the United States of America. In 1789, the same year that Washington became president, in France, King Louis and Marie Antoinette, they're going to have trouble because the people are going to rise up and they're going to behead the king and the queen. By 1804, a man named Napoleon is going to start a massive empire in Europe. All of Europe's going to be at war, and France and Britain are going to go to war with each other. So this leaves a problem. Who does America side with? Well, Thomas Jefferson of the Democratic Republicans, he's in France. He loves France. He was in France when the revolution was going on. Alexander Hamilton, he sides with the British. So this is going to lead to further tension within George Washington's cabinet. Think about it this way. You're George Washington. What do you do? France is making the argument. They're saying, hey, we helped you with your American Revolution when you guys fought Britain. Why don't you help us? We're fighting Britain now. You kind of owe us. Britain's saying that French Revolution, it's way too violent. They're cutting off people's heads. What if that violence comes to America? So Washington does a brilliant decision. He says, you know what? I'm not going to side with anybody. I'm going to proclaim neutrality. And it's very smart because America is still a young nation. It needs a little bit of time to, get going. However, there's going to be this French ambassador named Edmond Genet. And this French guy is going to go to America and he's going to try to recruit Americans into the French Revolution. And you're going to see that in the video on the next slide. So when you were watching the video, I hope you noticed how like pissed off George Washington was, and how angry Thomas Jefferson was when America wouldn't side with France. Washington in this quote says, "It's our policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world." So this is a prime example of neutrality. I want you to take a second, pause the video, read the two key concepts. Okay, so the map is kind of a little bit hard to read, but basically what's happening is that the U.S. government are going to forge diplomatic initiatives with Britain and Spain. So if you see the map right here, Britain is to America's north and Spain is to its west. Well, what's west? All the land that the settlers in America want to migrate to. Well, Spain is in its way, so this is going to cause uneasy tensions within Washington's administration. Okay, so the United States, it has two problems. Great Britain to the north and Spain to its west. So Washington's goal is proclaim neutrality, don't pick a side, and stay out of war. If you look at the key concept, it says this word diplomatic initiative. Basically, diplomatic or diplomacy means is talking it out with other countries in order to avoid war. So Washington is going to send his assistant, Thomas Pinckney, to make an agreement with Spain. And here's basically what the agreement said. The United States is going to have trading rights around the Gulf of New Orleans. It's going to be allowed to trade up and down the Mississippi River, and it's going to establish a border with Florida, Spanish Florida. If you don't remember this particular treaty, that's not a big deal. We'll talk about the importance of it in the next slide. Okay, so here's what's going on. Now we're going to be talking about um, how Europe and all of that is affecting the United States. So in Europe, if you remember, Napoleon, he is starting all this war. Britain is going to war with France. Now, as American ships are going to Europe, they are being intercepted by British ships. And as they're being intercepted by British ships, a lot of the times those British ships are going to kidnap American sailors and force them to serve in the British Navy. This is something called impressment. Meanwhile, at home, the colonists, they're ready to move west. Who's out west? Native Americans. Here's the kicker. The British are supplying arms to the Native Americans. They always say that when you become president, it's super stressful. Here's what's going on in Washington's presidency. Let's recap. So his two assistants, they can't get along. There's war and chaos going on in France. He doesn't want to pick a side. The British are kidnapping American sailors. The British are in the territory that they should have given up. And they're supplying arms to the Native Americans who are fighting American soldiers. He proclaims neutrality, but there's so much tension going on. So, as Washington, what do you do? Remember, your goal, his goal, was to stay out of war. Okay, so, in another diplomatic initiative, in order to stay out of war, he is going to send another assistant named John Jay over to Europe. He's going to send him to Great Britain. They're going to come to an agreement that the British could technically keep seizing American ships as long as the British give up their forts in American territory. That's going to free up the soldiers to start fighting the Native Americans. And this is going to lead to the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. As Americans are moving west, the American army is going to defeat a confederacy or a loose alliance of Native Americans along the Ohio River Valley. And the natives are going to look to the British for help, but the British are not going to help them. And the United States is going to easily win this war. The natives are going to be kicked out of this Ohio Valley, and now America has all the land that it needs to start moving west. Okay, so we talked about two treaties, Jay's Treaty, Pinckney's Treaty. Jay's Treaty is a little bit more important, but what you need to know about both of them is at the bottom, both of these things, they avoided war, and that was Washington's goal. But if you really think about it a little bit, it kind of sided or made the United States allies with Great Britain, and all the pro-French people under Thomas Jefferson, they did not like that at all. Okay, we're going to change topics a little bit. So, under Hamilton's plan, remember, he's the Secretary of the Treasury. He's going to suggest to George Washington that we should put a tax on whiskey. What does a tax do? It takes money and funds the government. The Western farmers in Pennsylvania, they're poor and they generally like to drink. So, they are going to be against this tax on whiskey. And now it's a challenge. The people are going to rise up and they're going to challenge the government. Let's compare this with something we learned before. Do you remember Shays' Rebellion and how Shays' Rebellion ended up challenging the government under the Articles of Confederation and the Articles of Confederation couldn't do anything? Well, this is the first test of the new government under George Washington and the US Constitution. And the new government is going to put down this whiskey rebellion. So it's tested. Did it succeed? It definitely did. All right. I know there's a ton of information in 3.10. I apologize. I want you to pause this, read the key concept and the objective, please. Okay, so remember, this is going to lead to two political parties. The Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, who sort of believed in like an elite class. He believed in a strong central government and a sort of like an urban elite, like the cities. Whereas Thomas Jefferson believed in a farming rural America, and he believed more in states' rights and a weak central government. So Washington was elected to two four-year terms, 8 years total. In 1797, on his way out, he gives a farewell speech. And in his farewell address, he warns against the dangers of political parties and how it can divide the country, and against getting involved in European affairs or foreign affairs in general. Both times he was ignored. All right, so you might see this political cartoon again, maybe on the test, on the exam. You have George Washington on the top right-hand corner. He's kind of like in heaven right now, and or he's dead. And you have two people who represent the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, and they are fighting over pillars of the country. And if you look at the top, we see liberty and independence. And basically, the message is if they keep fighting, we're going to lose our liberty. Yeah. So, John Adams in 1797, the vice president, goes up against the former Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, who is a Democratic Republican. They're from two different parties. And Adams gets the majority of electoral votes. He becomes president. In the Constitution, it says that the second place person gets to be vice president. Why is this problematic? Because what they didn't foresee when they wrote the Constitution is that there would be two members who have to work together who are from completely different parties. If you remember, though, the two of them were friends. They did write the Declaration of Independence together, but that friendship is not going to last. Yeah. So when Adams becomes president, he wants to continue Washington's policy of neutrality, not getting involved in European wars. And there are two events that happen in his presidency: the XYZ affair and the Alien and Sedition Acts. One thing you need to remember is that John Adams is a Federalist. So he is a lot more biased than George Washington, who is a little bit more in the middle. Okay, so here's the XYZ affair. Under Adams' presidency, he also wants to establish neutrality, but he wants to try to do some diplomatic talking with France. So he sends three of his messengers or his diplomats. You don't need to know their names, but they go over to France and they're met with three other French diplomats. Um, but before they do that, they're waiting and they're waiting and they're waiting, and it's like hours. They finally meet the three French diplomats and they call them X, Y, and Z. This is why it's called the XYZ affair. Where did they get the letters? I don't know. But those three diplomats say to the American diplomats, you can see the guy that you want to see, our boss Talleyrand, the guy who you need to talk to, but you got to give us a bribe beforehand. This was seen as so insulting, and it was kind of like a scandal in John Adams' presidency. And remember, he's a Federalist, so already he's pro-British. Now he's even more pro-British. In order to keep Americans safe, John Adams is going to establish the Alien and Sedition Acts. Remember, there's already tension between America and France. So one of the things that he's going to do is he's going to establish the Sedition Act, which makes it a crime to criticize the president in newspapers or verbally say anything. If they do that, they'll be thrown in jail. He's taking away their First Amendment rights. And when he does that, his claim is that he's making America safe because there could be, I don't know, French spies who may be trying to overthrow the government. On top of that, any French sympathizer, any French immigrants, any immigrant in general, he has the power to kick any aliens out of the country, all for the safety of America. Who's going to be against this? Thomas Jefferson, who is more for the people's rights. And remember, Jefferson is also a Democratic Republican, whereas John Adams is a Federalist. So can the president take away people's rights? What if the president does something that is unconstitutional against the law? People from Virginia and Kentucky, that was their argument. They said that the federal government couldn't overreach its power, it couldn't abuse its power. So they established the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, which basically said that as states, they have the right to invalidate anything that the national government does. So now we have this conflict between the states, governments, and the national government, and this is going to continue in the future. But that is the end of 3.10. I know that was a ton of information. We're going to go on to 3.11 now. Right. So when I think of Korea, I think of like kimchi, K-pop, K-dramas, high-rise apartments, fine dust. So this all contributes to our culture. In America, because it's a new country, we are going to now look at the developing American identity. What does it mean to be an American in this new country? Please take a moment, read the learning objective and the historical developments. Our basic goal is how can we explain the changes in American culture from 1754, the French and Indian War, all the way up to 1800? What changed? What stayed the same? Okay, so there is going to be this overarching national American culture, but there's also going to be regional cultures, a New England culture, a Southern culture, a Western frontier culture. They're all going to be different, but at the same time, they're all American. So, what is this American identity? When I think of Americanism, I think of freedom and liberty and republicanism and equality before the law. All of these ideas were the responsibility of mothers to teach their sons so they could go on and become responsible citizens. Granted, women could not vote, they couldn't participate in politics, but they did have a duty to teach their children, and it's a duty that they took seriously. Um, and in order to do that, those women had to be educated. So Massachusetts is going to take the lead, and it's going to send boys and girls to school in elementary school. A woman named Judith Sargent Murray is going to argue that women should even be able to attain the necessities of life apart from a man. That's going in the more extreme extent, but for now, what you need to memorize is the Republican motherhood. We learned this in a last unit too, so it's pretty important. But if you notice, I was just talking about white women. What about women of color? Black women, uh, either slaves or servants, Native American women, even though some of their tribes were matrilineal, meaning the family name went down through the woman, because of the wars going on between American soldiers and Native Americans, men are going to get a lot more authority. Um, but regardless, women of color are not going to get nearly as much education as their white counterparts. Okay, so let's switch gears. We're now going to be talking about national identity in regards to art, literature, and architecture. So, in keeping with American identity in regards to art, if you're an artist, you're going to draw about events that shape your identity. And one of those events was obviously the Revolutionary War. Two artists that you could include in your essays are Charles Wilson Peale and Jonathan Trumbull. If you notice the pictures on the right, we have George Washington, General George Washington, in his military uniform. Down below, we have the Declaration of Independence. Two of these themes are war on the top, and then the Enlightenment and documents down at the bottom. One of the things that shapes our identity today is TikTok and how, like, everybody knows certain dances on that app. So back then, they read books, and one of the most popular books that came second only to the Bible was Benjamin Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac. And in it, he would have different little quotes like "a penny saved is a penny earned." Those were very popular, and it was widely read. In addition to that, the architecture is going to be very much influenced by the Greek architecture, and this is going to be called a revival. When you are bringing back certain characteristics of that architecture, if you notice in Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, his home, you see the columns as well as the dome. That's influenced by the Greek and Roman styles. The final belief that is going to help shape this American identity is this idea of separation of church and state, which was made plain in Thomas Jefferson's Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. Um, the government can't force you to support a religion. The government can't force you to donate to certain religions. So this, especially back then, was a very American idea. This, along with so much more, is going to contribute to an American sense of who they were. And that kind of wraps up topic 3.11. So now we're going to go on to 3.12. We're almost done. Let's go. All right, guys, we're almost done. So, if you notice in all the topics, they're different. They're called topics because they center on a different theme. So, the next theme that we're going to be talking about, last time we talked about identity. Now we're going to be talking about migration and movement of people. Please pause this and read the both objectives as well as the historical developments. We're going to be talking about migration, so please pause this, read the key concept, and then we'll move on. So migration, where are the American settlers moving? They're moving to the west. This should look familiar to you because we talked about the Battle of Fallen Timbers in a previous unit, and the United States fights the Native American Confederacy for this strip of land. They win because the Native Americans don't have British help anymore due to Jay's Treaty. And now, because they're essentially, the Native Americans are essentially kicked out, the American settlers now have this entire strip of land to continue moving west. Read this key concept. As Americans move west, they're going to establish something called a frontier culture. So imagine you want to move west and you want to start a whole new life. It's like you're going on an adventure and you're like exploring. Look at that photo right here. This is Daniel Boone. And if you notice, he's taking his entire family, his entire people with him, and they're being really courageous and daring, and they're starting a new life for themselves. As the settlers move west, the question is going to become, is slavery going to be allowed in this new territory? So as settlers move west, the question is slavery going to be allowed? At first, the founders thought that slavery was just a practice that was going to die out on its own. However, with the invention of the cotton gin, which you see in this picture right here, it automatically separates the cotton from the seeds. Before this, you literally had to pick them out painstakingly with your hands. You had to pick out the seeds, and this took forever. So now I have an abundance of cotton. I need workers to pick that cotton. Who are the workers going to be? It's going to be slaves. And I also need more land. So the South is going to become reliant on slave labor to pick the cotton, especially in the deep South. There's money to be made. So this is going to form the Southern economy. All right, so we're done with 312. We'll get into the Southern economy more later, but now we are on the last topic of Unit 3, 313. It says continuity and change. So basically what this means is what changed and what stayed the same. You don't have to read all the key concepts. This is just a review, but the learning objective is explain how the American independence movement affected society from 1754 to 1800. So let's get into it. This worksheet wasn't my idea. I actually got it on the AP Daily videos, which I suggest that you guys watch. But these are the themes of the AP course, and we're going to focus on one of them. So if we focus on one of the themes called American and National Identity, what changed or what stayed the same? So in Unit 2, from the previous unit, we have colonial charters, navigation acts, which said that the colonies had to trade with Great Britain. The colonies supported Great Britain against their war with France and the American Indians in the French and Indian War. But now in Unit 3, there are these ideas like Thomas Paine's Common Sense, the Declaration of Independence. The Sons of Liberty are going to protest taxes. The Boston Tea Party, Continental Congress, all of these things are going to form and shape the ideas of American independence. So are we seeing change or are we seeing continuity? Obviously, it's going to be changed because the colonists are no longer gonna view themselves as British. They are now the United States of America. If you want to practice and do some of the other topics, please go for it. When we come back from Chuseok break, I want you guys to plan for a test probably on Friday, definitely on Friday of the week when we come back. AP exam test takers, you've known what your question is. It's going to be an LEQ. It is this question right here. You should know what the rubric is because you did the LEQ preparation homework. One warning, do not go on the internet and try to look up answers because if they too closely match up your answers, I'm probably going to have you rewrite it and deduct a lot of points. Try to do it on your own. Please read these directions. For the non-AP exam takers, you're going to have a 30-question multiple choice. It's going to be on these topics in the box. Ignore the numbers right here. That's something different. 72 to 75 and 76 to 80. You don't have to memorize those. And you will have one essay worth 10 points. You can choose from one of these questions. Can you see that? You can't see that, so I'm going to put it on the next slide. Okay, so remember, this is for non-exam takers only. These are the topics that you need to know for your test. You don't have to memorize all of Unit 3, just these topics. And for your essay, you can choose from one of these three. It doesn't have to be an entire full essay, it's just a paragraph, but the paragraph has to have 10 details. So it should be kind of a longer paragraph. So yeah, that's it. Okay, if you are a non-exam taker, you can stop. You are done. Please turn in that homework worksheet. For the AP exam takers, this is your homework for over the break. Please keep going and continue. For the AP exam takers, welcome back. Because we have to stick to a tight schedule, we are now going to be getting into Unit 4, 4.1 to 4.3. Here are the key terms that you need to know. Let's go. Okay, so we're moving right along. We are now in Unit 4, 1800 to 1848. Remember, this is an AP course, so we go pretty fast. If you are unsure of any of these things from Units 1 through Unit 3, please come back and see me. Let's get started. All right, so you don't have to memorize all of these key concepts. They are a preview of everything that's going to be in Unit 4, but let's look at the learning objective. So in the learning objective, it says, explain the context in which the Republic developed from 1800 to 1848. This is contextualization. Remember, all point one, topic point ones are always contextualization. Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to use in order to contextualize is the acronym GEOSPRINT. I'm going to do this one for you, but you should be getting in the habit of practicing this. This goes in your first paragraph of your LEQ or your DBQ. So geographical, social, political, religious, intellectual. We're going to skip technological and move on to economic. So what allowed for the establishment of the new republic, the new United States? Well, if I'm going back through my notes in Unit 3 and Unit 2, I have geographically, the United States can now move west. They're no longer 13 colonies, they are 13 states. There's no more proclamation of 1763 by the king that said that they couldn't move west. So they're moving west, they're exploring. Socially, there's this idea of the Republican motherhood. Slavery is going to be firmly established in the South with the cotton gin, but the importation of slaves is going to be outlawed in 1807. Politically, obviously, they had the Revolutionary War. The Treaty of Paris is going to recognize the United States as an actual country on the international stage, and they're going to have a constitutional convention after the Articles of Confederation, where they're going to create their constitution. Religiously, the only religious movement that we talked about was the Great Awakening. Intellectually, which focuses on philosophy. Philosophically, Enlightenment ideas are going to influence the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution. Um, in regards to art, we're going to have Jefferson's Monticello, which is inspired by Greek columns and domes, Franklin's Poor Richard's Almanac, with respect to art, themes of war and the Enlightenment. Finally, economically, things didn't really change that much. There's still going to be shipbuilding and commerce in the north, commercial farms in the middle states, and in the southern states, large plantations, especially as they move west, because now, with the invention of the cotton gin, they're going to have an increased reliance on slaves. So, do you have to have all of this? No. Your contextualization should be about 3 to 5 sentences, but what you should be able to do when you brainstorm is literally list off these things so you have something to set the stage for whatever your thesis is. All right, now we're in topic 4.2. We just did contextualization. I want you to pause this, read the learning objective, as well as the key developments. Okay, so our entire question for this unit is what were the causes and effects of policy debates in the early republic? What we need to know is what were the policy and why did they debate over that policy? We're going to get into that right now. So what were the policies and why did they argue over these policies? Pause this, read it. Tariffs, power of the federal government, and relationships with Europe. And one big issue was the Louisiana Purchase. We're going to get into that. If you recall, the last president was John Adams. He was a Federalist. He is going to lose the election in 1800 to his vice president, Thomas Jefferson, his once former friend. And Thomas Jefferson is a member of the Democratic Republican Party. Two parties. This is going to be a peaceful transfer of power from one party to another party. Donald Trump and the Republicans could have learned from the Revolution of 1800 because that was a peaceful transfer of power, and in 2020, this was definitely not. How did America double its size? I'm just going to give you a context real quick. So this is Napoleon. He is French. He started his French Empire. In France, one of the things that it had was a huge world empire. The French have a colony in Haiti. The Haitians are going to rise up. They're going to start a rebellion. Napoleon knows this. He has to put down that rebellion. Jefferson sees that this is happening, and his goal is to go to Napoleon and try to get trading rights along the Mississippi River. But Napoleon says, you know what? Why don't you just give me $15 million and I'll give you the whole dang Louisiana Purchase. I'll give you all of this blue territory. To which Jefferson says, yep, that's going to work. So the United States, it buys the Louisiana Purchase from France because Napoleon had to deal with the Haitian Revolution. It literally doubled the size of the entire country. Remember, Jefferson argued about strict constructionism, which means that the government can't do anything that's not in the Constitution. He argued that with Hamilton and when Hamilton tried to do the National Bank, but he kind of goes back on his principles and he's like, even though it doesn't say that America can't purchase land from another country in the US Constitution, I'm still going to do it anyway. So one of the debates is how much power should the federal government have? Jefferson is going to campaign on the promise of limiting the government's power instead of the Federalists who wanted to expand its power. He's going to get rid of the whiskey tax that was established under George Washington. He's going to reduce the size of the military, but at the same time, he's going to purchase the Louisiana Purchase, which is an overreach of the federal government's power. So he's sort of doing both, but he is most known for this purchase. Now that Jefferson just doubled the size of the country, he's going to send out Lewis and Clark as part of this group called the Corps of Discovery in 1804. And their stated goals was to make relations with the Native Americans and explore the territory and go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so thus far we've talked about the legislative branch, we've talked about the executive branch under the presidencies of Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. Now we're going to be talking about the other branch that hasn't been really discussed yet, the Supreme Court. And they're going to step into the scene under John Marshall, the Chief Justice, and he's going to be like, hey, those are the two branches of government, but we are supposed to be an equal branch in this government. So if you remember the idea of checks and balances, a lot of times the president can't just do whatever he wants. He has to get the approval of Congress or the Supreme Court. And one of the first decisions on the American stage that the Supreme Court is going to come into play is the case of Marbury versus Madison. So give you a backstory. John Adams, he's a Federalist. Before he left office on like his final day, he decides to appoint midnight judges because he appointed them at midnight. These judges are Federalists, and now Jefferson, who's coming into the presidency as a Democratic Republican, it's going to be harder for him to do his job because he has a bunch of Federalist judges in the court. So Adams kind of like screwed over Jefferson because he's kind of salty about losing the election. So what happens is Jefferson's Secretary of State, James Madison, uh, who is at the bottom right-hand corner, I think my face is covering his picture, he does not deliver the papers to one of those judges, Federalist judges, and that judge's name is William Marbury. So Marbury sues Madison, goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and now the Supreme Court has to make a decision. Does the judge get the job? Okay, so the Supreme Court ruled that William Marbury, the judge, he didn't get his appointment as the judge. This establishes judicial review, where the Supreme Court can review cases between the executive branch and determine whether those laws are constitutional. Do you have to know Marbury versus Madison? You have to connect it with judicial review. Okay, so in another case, there is this case called McCulloch versus Maryland. Now remember, the Supreme Court is establishing its role within the three branches. Can a state bank, can a state tax a federal bank? The Supreme Court ruled that national law trumps state law, furthering the power of the federal government. So again, the Supreme Court is making decisions and interpreting the Constitution. Okay, so as the judiciary branch is on the rise, let's go back to the executive branch. Thus far, we've talked about the presidencies of George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and now we're getting into James Madison. James Madison is also a Democratic Republican, and we're going to see what went on during his presidency. Some of the things, especially our relationships with Europe. Madison was a wartime president, and the defining moment of his presidency was the War of 1812. I want you to pause this and read this. These are the causes of the war and the effects. So even though America got its independence from Great Britain, it defeated Britain in the Revolutionary War by 1783. There is still rising tension from the 1780s all the way up until 1812. Some of those tensions with Great Britain were the impressment of American sailors, if you recall from previous units, how the British were kidnapping American sailors as the settlers in the United States were moving westward. The British were aiding the Native Americans in their fight against those settlers. The British were still unhappy about the fact that they had to lose its 13 colonies. And in 1812, there are these new generation of politicians called the War Hawks, who are largely Democratic Republican, who are calling for war. They want to prove themselves on the world stage. Up until this point, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, they all wanted neutrality. But now these people feel ready to go to war. The Federalists in the Northeast, they opposed going to war, and they felt that they could break away from the Union. That didn't happen, but the tension is still there between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans who want war. While the causes and effects of the War of 1812 are more important than what actually went on during the war, what did happen during the war was that the British went in and they pretty much burned the White House to the ground. Another fact about the War of 1812 is that a poet named Francis Scott Key, At the Battle of Fort McHenry, he noticed the bombs that were bursting in air, and that gave him the inspiration to write the United States national anthem. But anyway, what's most important about the War of 1812 is the causes and the effects. The causes we already explained. The effects of the war is that it ended in a tie. But think about it. A young nation like the United States just fought the most powerful nation again in Great Britain. They didn't lose. It was a tie. It was a stalemate. That's considered a victory. So because of this war, this is going to inspire patriotism and national unity among the United States. The economy is going to grow, and it's going to spur on war heroes who are later going to become presidents, and Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison, who fought during the War of 1812. The Federalist Party is also going to be on the decline. John Adams is going to be the one and only Federalist president. If you look at this chart right here, was the War of 1812 good for the United States? Yeah, because it led to increased nationalism, increased manufacturing, and domestic economic growth. So war is usually always good for the economy. Okay, so we finally made it to the finish line. Topic 4.3, politics and regional interest. I need you to read the historical developments. Our learning objective is explain how different regional interests affected the debates about the role of the federal government in the early republic. Basically, what this means is if you have regional interests, like the North has their agenda, the middle states have their agenda, the southern states have their agenda. How is the federal government, the central government, going to deal with all these differing interests? One thing that is very important is this system called the American system. Whenever you see this word, I want you to always associate it with a politician named Henry Clay. You know how Donald Trump always says "Make America Great Again"? Well, the original "Make America Great Again," I would argue, is a guy named Henry Clay who established the American system, where he taxed imports, just kind of like Trump does, and with that tax money, he is going to try to improve the infrastructure of the United States. He's going to try to improve roads and canals, and he's also going to try to establish a second national bank. Henry Clay is going to be one of the heads of a new party, because remember, there's no longer a Federalist Party, so the new party is going to be called the Whig Party. And so Henry Clay, American system. Let's get back to the regional interests. Regionally, the North some people in the North, called abolitionists, want to ban slavery in the Westward Territory. In the South, they want to obviously keep slavery. So these are the regional interests that they have, and it's going to be temporarily stemmed, or the fighting is going to be put off with this thing called the Missouri Compromise. Okay, so with these regional differences, the North being pretty much free states in blue and the South being slave states in red, they're going to come to a compromise when Missouri wants to enter the Union as a slave state. This is going to be a problem because if there are more slave states than free states, it's going to tip the balance in the U.S. Senate. So in order to fix this, the federal government is going to establish a compromise where Maine, which used to be part of Massachusetts, is going to be now a free state. So now you're going to have a balance with 11 free states and 11 slave states. Additionally, going forward, any states below this yellow line are going to be slave states as settlers move west. Any states above the line should be free states. This compromise is going to avoid any conflict internally, at least temporarily.